Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Donald Trump just slapped a $100,000 fee on H1B visas. It's at the end of the road for the migrant sweatshops for big tech, healthcare, and universities. On Friday, Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing a $100,000 fee on H-1B visas. This is a big deal because the fee is higher than the average H-1B salary, meaning it prices out the sweatshops. Now, the background here is H-1B started in 1990 to bring top talent from around the world. The original salary cutoff was $60,000, which was a lot of money in 1990, but it was never adjusted for inflation. It's still $60 today. So inflation alone should have taken it to $139. Tech salary growth should have taken it closer to $190. This turned it from top talent to sweatshop, with an estimated 2.5 million foreign STEM workers in the U.S., 1 in 4 computer jobs, which are overwhelmingly occupying the first rungs on the ladder that would have cultivated American tech talent. Tulsa Independent and its roughly 3 million people on the H-1B gravy train, of whom roughly 70% are from India. Now, 100K is grand, but there's a lot of devils in the details. First, the fee does not hit the existing 700,000 H-1Bs, since it's a fee on new applications. Plus, it's a one-time fee on a 3-year visa, meaning it comes to just $33,000 per year. That still prices out the sweatshops, but it is a big step down. The other thing is H-1Bs are only half the battle. There's another 2.3 million visas that allow foreigners to work. 250,000 are so-called L1s, where Google hires you in India and transfers you to the U.S., which is an obvious way to evade the new 100,000 fee. Another is 350,000 intern or training visas that literally train people to go home and permanently take American jobs. Then there's a clutch of country-specific work visas, O1, E3, EB1, TN, that come to roughly 100,000, of which a third go to Mexicans. Finally, there's a million F1 student visas that allow migrants to work on average 30 hours a week. This has spawned an entire industry of visa mills like Tri-Valley University in California, which is 95% Indian, charges just $2,500 tuition. So at 30 hours a week, students make 10 times what they made in India, even with the tuition. Essentially, universities are renting visas to replace American jobs. And when those F1s graduate, there's another 250,000 so-called OPT, optional practical training visas, that allow them to work for up to 3 years until they get the H-1B. It is a very big club. Now, for now, Democrats are hoping lawfare, Obama judges, will block the fee, but they will fail since fees already exist on H-1Bs, while the Supremes decided back in 2018 that the administration has nearly unlimited discretion who it lets in and on what terms. So what's next? America's ability to attract the best and brightest is one of our superpowers. China does not hold a candle, but it got gamed into million-man sweatshops that Trump just took a big step to ending. Still, there's a lot more swamp to drain, even in legal migration. AI is wiping out mainstream media, and it is glorious. The Wall Street Journal reports that mainstream news sites are getting, quote, crushed by Google's new AI tools, where instead of reading the article, people scan the AI summary and move on. The journal estimates search traffic to legacy media has fallen by half for sites ranging from the Huffington Post to the Washington Post. Business Insider just cut its staff by 21%, citing, quote, extreme traffic drops outside of our control, as in AI. At a company-wide meeting earlier this year, Atlantic Magazine said they now assume search traffic will drop to, quote, zero, saying they need to evolve their business model. Even the Gray Lady, the New York Times, says search share dropped 20% in the 3 years since AI search came out. Now, this is making a perfect storm for legacy media, which is already hemorrhaging viewers, since they lie for a living and treat 2/3 of their viewers with grotesque, even murderous contempt. According to Gallup, trust in media is the lowest in 50 years, with just 31% of Americans saying they trust mainstream media. Hollywood box office is down by half since 2019. Newspaper jobs are down 3/4 since their peak. MSNBC audience is down 30% in a single year. CNN is down 56% in 1 year. The median viewer at CNN is now 67 years old. At MSNBC, it is 71. An upcoming ban on pharmaceutical advertising threatens 1 in 5 ad minutes. This perfect storm is already driving media to the auction block. Trump-aligned Skydance just bought CBS. Another Trump ally bought the LA Times, the third biggest newspaper in the Republic. CNN and MSNBC are being reorganized for sale. So if the audience is fleeing legacy, where are the eyeballs going? Easy, new media. Podcasts, Substack newsletters, social media. As in, AI summaries can replace the slop that CNN or USA Today pumps out, but it cannot replace a Joe Rogan show or a Charlie Kirk podcast. In fact, a recent study found a majority of Americans now get their news from social media. Now, this matters because while mainstream media is near monolithically left-wing, or at best establishment Republican, new media is overwhelmingly independent or MAGA. This is because legacy media got its audience from advertising. They bought it, while new media got it from word of mouth, the content itself. So Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson did not buy their audience with ads. This means if AI search guts, paid promotion, legacy media dies, and new media inherits the audience. To illustrate, these daily videos get roughly half the viewers of Anderson Cooper. Joe Rogan has triple the audience of the top news show on TV. Of the top 50 podcasts in America, just 7 are mainstream media. The other 86% are independent. So as next, for 100 years, American media has been dominated by the left and its useful idiots, ever since FDR started throwing journalists in jail. As recently as the 1970s, you had essentially 0 dissenting voices. The 80s opened up with talk radio, but we were still 10-1. The 90s was the internet. Bloggers took us to maybe 5-1, and then social media, which brought us nearly even, which is why they panicked with the censorship. AI, gutting legacy media, could finally even it up. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. The Mexican economy is officially in recession, flatlining in Donald Trump's trade war, and making Mexico entirely dependent on Trump's good graces. Last week, Mexico's National Statistics Agency reported retail sales crashed 9% on the year. Sales of transport equipment, like trucks, dropped 12%. Construction dropped 18%. Foreign investment fell 21%. In export hub Juarez, it dropped 56%. This all put Mexico in technical recession for the first half of the year, with 5 consecutive months of negative growth, basically Trump's entire second term. What's driving it, of course, is tariffs. The Mexican city of Juarez alone has lost 64,000 export jobs, about 1 in 5. Extrapolating across Mexico, that could mean something like 750,000 jobs. U.S. population terms, that's closer to 2 million jobs. It'd actually be a lot worse, but Trump exempted a lot of Mexico's exports as a reward for deploying 10,000 troops to the border to block migrants, fight drug trafficking, as well as delivering a parade of cartel leaders to the U.S. for prosecution. As Trump put it with characteristic nuance, quote, Mexico does what we tell them to do. The background here is roughly 1 in 3 jobs in Mexico is exporting to the U.S. The reverse direction is a couple percent. Back in April, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on all Mexican goods. It's actually 50% for steel, aluminum, and copper. But he agreed to exempt the 84% of Mexico's exports covered by USMCA, the NAFTA replacement, because of the border cooperation. If he hadn't done that, Mexico would be looking at millions of lost jobs. Now, Mexico's not out of the woods yet because USMCA is up for scheduled review next year. and Trump knows leverage when he sees it. Most likely, he'll push for more access for U.S. goods and Mexican telecoms, energy, and agriculture, along with cracking down on Chinese, Japanese, and Korean goods shipped through Mexico to get in under USMCA. That would be so-called rules of origin. Mexico's president is already dancing for the money. She recently announced new tariffs on China, basically saying we're getting punished for this huge trade deficit when it's going into China's pockets. Now, no, Mexicans have no more love for China than Americans. They are not going to do favors for Beijing when Trump's got a third of Mexican jobs in his pocket. So what's next? The key for Mexico is that USMCA exemption. They can buy time policing the border, which actually helps them since it starves the cartels. But given Mexico and Canada make up over a quarter of U.S. imports and over a third of cars and parts, it is too much money for Trump to let go. So USMCA will be renegotiated. Meantime, Mexico will play fight so his voters don't feel pushed around. They've already got anti-gringo gentrification riots in Mexico City. But with 1 in 3 jobs on the table, Mexico will keep doing what Trump tells them. Nearly every academic study is garbage, a waste, sometimes a fraud of taxpayer money that yields a tsunami of misinformation that kills thousands of Americans. The NIH wants to fix it. Recently, NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya announced a new journal he hopes will transform our corrupt and increasingly dangerous scientific establishment. The core of the problem is something called the replication crisis, where it turns out the majority of even top studies cannot, in fact, be replicated. In science, if you cannot replicate a result, it is not real. There's a problem given millions of Americans take drugs or get life-changing medical treatments with potentially harmful side effects based on these fake studies. To give a flavor, several years ago, German pharmaceutical giant Bayer was looking to develop cancer drugs. But before they started, they redid major oncology studies to make sure the data was sound. Out of the 67 top studies they tried to replicate, just 21%, could be reproduced. This is one of the biggest pharma companies in the entire world. A similar effort by pharmaceutical giant Amgen found just 11% of studies could be replicated. Note, this is studies dealing with cells. We can only imagine studies dealing with people, who are, of course, much more complex than cells. So what percent of psychology, sociology, gender swapping, even economics is false? Perhaps 90%. It could be 99%. So why is it so bad? Some of it is literally fake numbers or statistical manipulation, cherry picking or so-called p-hacking. A lot of it is so-called publication bias, where papers that don't find the correct answer are discarded, as in your pharma grants, government grants, or left-wing peers don't like them, while any findings that do attract funding or professional clout get blasted out even if they are statistical mirages. Now, given government grants make up most academic funding, $109 billion last year, this is a big reason why academia is so comically left. As Nobel economist James Buchanan famously put it, professors are, quote, camp-following whores who will say whatever you pay them to say. So to fix this, the NIH is proposing to fund independent studies that simply retest key findings, what Bayer and Amgen did. This should be very fun when they run foundational left-wing studies through the meat grinder, from mutilating children to global warming to the minimum wage or inflation and central banking. Grab the popcorn. So what's next? In the near term, the main takeaway from the replication crisis is any study that feels off probably is fake. As in, you should assume any study is false, at least until science cleans itself up, meaning not just replication, but embracing skeptics instead of silencing them. The larger issue is government has all but destroyed the core value of science, which is the search for truth. The motto of Harvard University, for example, is Lux et Veritas, light and truth, not a joke. Modern academia instead has devolved into pay for play, funded by pharma companies and a permanent left-wing bureaucracy embezzling taxpayer money to turn truth and light into propaganda. The essence of science, the skepticism and independence, is the defining characteristic, what makes science among humanity's greatest inventions. Instead, our scientific establishment has been corrupted into parody. Replication starts to drain the swamp. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is Kite, maker of the famous block clock. Kite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's COINKITE.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Exploding government debt is taking over, forcing countries into policies not for jobs and inflation, but for the debt. For months now, Donald Trump has been hammering Jerome Powell to cut rates because of exploding interest payments on our $36 trillion national debt. One tweet berated, quote, "Too late, Powell," for costing $360 billion per year for every point of interest rates. Of course, that's just federal debt. Toss in state, local, and private debt, and it's closer to $570 billion of additional debt payments for every point of interest rates. Meanwhile, in Britain, the government just announced fresh tax hikes on top of the biggest tax hike in a generation to convince investors that Britain can actually handle deficits over 5% of GDP. Note, the U.S. is actually worse. We're over 6% deficit. But then we have the world's reserve currency that Britain lost specifically because of out-of-control spending 100 years ago. I also mentioned in a recent video, Japan's prime minister said they can never again cut taxes because the debt is too big. So this all raises the specter of something called fiscal dominance, where debt gets so big that it takes over economic policy, meaning the Fed cannot raise rates and governments cannot cut taxes. In fact, they're forced into tax hikes. There's a problem for a couple reasons. First off, fiscal dominance castrates central banks because if debt interest is big enough, rate hikes stimulate the economy, while cuts strangle it. The debt payments go down. That cancels the Fed's main tools. Second, fiscal dominance forces long-term inflation because central banks are forced into low rates and even money printing QE to finance the debt. Third, and most important, fiscal dominance means central banks cannot stop runaway inflation. To see why, consider what happened in the 1970s inflation. At the time, there was concern that central banks had terminally lost the plot. It was game over, the dollar would collapse, millions wiped out, and we would go back to gold. Of course, that didn't happen because Fed Chair Paul Volcker jacked interest rates to 19%, levels we had not seen since the Civil War hyperinflation. 19% gutted the economy, of course, but it stopped inflation in its tracks. It reassured bond investors that there is a 19% parachute if inflation hits the fan. The problem is back in the 70s, even adjusting for inflation, the national debt was 10 times smaller. Today, it's 120% of GDP. That means we cannot do the Volcker thing today. There is no parachute. To illustrate, the current deficit is around $2 trillion, of which half, $1.1 trillion, is debt interest. If inflation got out of control and the Fed hiked to 19%, the first year alone, $10 trillion of debt goes from 3% interest to 19% interest, 6 times higher. That takes the deficit from $2 trillion to $3.5 trillion in just 12 months. Give it another 2 years, and the deficit hits nearly $5 trillion, which is almost 20% of GDP. There is no way investors are buying a 20% deficit. Countries like Turkey or Sri Lanka blow out at 10, meaning the Fed has to step in as buyer of last resort, printing every penny, which makes the inflation worse. In short, the Volcker parachute that's backstopping the entire Ponzi is gone. Congress spent it. The last man standing is Weimar Germany. The Fed literally prints the deficit. So what's next? As Lynn Alden puts it, nothing stops this train. Congress missed their chance. Reserve currency could buy another decade or two as foreigners absorb the fresh dollars, but our entire financial system is now flying without a parachute. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.